I Testify is about testifying of what Jesus Christ has done and can do in each of our lives. Through testimony of people just like you and through study of His Word, our prayer is to encourage each follower of Christ to be a light in this world. So let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Matthew 5:16.
Hi, welcome to iTestify. Thank you for joining us. We have a special guest with us, Israel Ramos. He is the Director of Public Campus Ministries of the Michigan Conference as well as Lakeside Union. And he'll be sharing with us about how God has led him into pastoral ministries, but specifically in Adventist education regarding students in public universities as well as missions. Thanks for joining us, Israel.
Nice to be here with you.
And you're going to kind of start by opening up where you grew up and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, well, first of all, I work with not the Lakeside Union, but the Lake Union.
Oh,
so
sorry.
Yeah, just so that we don't get fired. We love the Lake Union. We don't want to lose our jobs. So
well, you can just blame Reed.
Yes, yeah, he's going to get me fired. So, yeah. So my roots are, they trace back down to California. I was born here in California, born in Los Angeles, and grew up in an Adventist home. And when I was in 4th grade, I went out and I studied in Adventist schools up to 4th grade. And so Adventist education, or the whole education process, has been a big part of my life. I went through Adventist schools up to 4th grade. Then we moved from LA to Riverside to Moreno Valley. And I went to public school for 4th, 5th, 6th grade, all the way up to high school. And during that time, my parents began to worry about our spirituality as kids. The challenges that we face in that kind of environment, and just the dangers that kind of are always around when you're in public education. Especially, I'm Mexican American, and so all the challenges with gangs and with that kind of a culture. And so they pressed the pastor to start a small school there at our church, and our church had no money to start that. We didn't have the facilities. We didn't have, the buildings to do that, to run a high school. We had a little elementary school there in Moreno Valley. And the pastor himself, an educator, decided to just do something for us as young people, and there was about 12 of us. He opened up the youth room in the back of the church. They transformed it into a school, and that opened up the way for me to have an Adventist high school education, my freshman year in high school.
Started in 9th grade, 12 students in a class.
12 students, yeah. Second semester, I think it dropped by half, maybe. I don't remember, it's so long ago now, but a big portion of the kids dropped out and they went back to public school or whatever. But I stayed back, my brother stayed back, a few others stayed back, and it was a funny name. It was called Valley Adventist Christian Academy, which is VACA in cow in Spanish. And so, we enjoyed it. Pastor Trujillo was the pastor. Arnold Trujillo just recently retired from, I think he's vice president at the Pacific Union, and he was the pastor then. He brought in this young recent graduate, Chester Clark, from Arkansas, and he became the principal and the associate pastor. And so it was kind of like a homeschool / academy kind of concept. And I think that to a large degree, it's Adventist education that ultimately had the greatest impact in my life as a Seventh-day Adventist.
So I'm curious, those years that you spent in public school, did you, back then, your 10, 11, 12-year-old self, did you know the difference? Did you experience a difference in your education? Yeah,
big difference. As a matter of fact, what's so funny is, because we just recently had the Teacher Appreciation Week. Yeah. Have you guys said thank you to your teachers?
No.
You should. You should.
school.
I did yesterday.
I don't know if they're still alive.
Yeah. You probably.
You're not that old.
Yeah.
I had older teachers.
Okay. All right. Hopefully they're not watching. Yeah. So my fourth grade teacher, her name, to this day I remember, Mrs. Laughlin, and I went to White Memorial School in LA, and probably I can still remember her. Mrs. Arakawa was the teacher before that, and Mrs. Nimhart, the teacher before that. I remember the names of my Adventist school teachers because they were more than teachers. You know, they were really ministers, is what they were. And my parents, you know, they immigrated from Mexico, and they didn't have an education, and so they had to work really hard, and you know, factory jobs. My dad drove trucks, and they had to sacrifice a lot for Adventist education, which meant that for most of the time, or for my whole time that I can remember while I was at White Memorial, you know, we left school, or we left home very early in the morning, and my mom had nowhere to drop us off. And I remember, especially Mrs. Arakawa, she'd come to school early, and she'd open the gate so that I could come in, and she'd tutor me. I needed a lot of tutoring. Aww. And so she would tutor me for an hour, 2 hours before school started. And the impact, I've actually been searching for her. I don't know where she is. I know she's still alive, but I don't know where she is. But anyway, she impacted me. And then in fourth grade, you know, that's when the transition took place from Adventist education to non-Adventist education in the middle of the year. And Mrs. Laughlin was just an excellent teacher. She taught, I still remember she taught us some sign language phrases and words. You know, she played the guitar, we sang songs. And I went from that environment to a non-Adventist education environment, which was the complete opposite. I mean, I had my first year, and I don't think, you know, my parents ever realized this. I never told them. But I remember transitioning to elementary school in fourth grade, and just the shock, you know, both with the classroom, like the students that I was in school with, and then also the teacher. I mean, I had probably my worst teacher ever, which I still remember his name, was my fourth grade teacher. Yeah, I won't say it. As a matter of fact, that's where just these challenges began to kind of, you know, conflict in my life. I went from praying in fourth grade in school to now, can I pray, or when are we going to pray, or, you know, all these different challenges that kind of came up, and I was just, it was a different. I was overwhelmed, completely different environment. And in order to fit in and you know, little by little you make friends, and they're good people, but with different values, and it's just my values began to just shift dramatically, and you know, you live life, and you're trying to just discover yourself and explore who you are and all that kind of stuff. And so at a very early age, by the time I was in fifth grade, it's just, I was beginning to struggle with all sorts of different identity issues. It was the first time in public school that I realized that I was a Mexican American, different from a Caucasian, different from an Asian or African American, or, you know, whatever. And I began to shape myself as that kind of a person, separate from everybody else. And in order to find identity, I found my identity by exclusion. And in doing so, you know, I got involved in the wrong crowds in order to find protection from the problems that result from racist interactions with other ethnic backgrounds. And so that just kind of spiraled into a huge mess. And that was just in just one semester and half a year. And so,
so you know, you're going into fifth grade, and you can already see the sensitivities and vulnerabilities you are as a youth. But now you're in public, reaching out to public university students, trying to get them to witness. But they're just as vulnerable to those influences. Yeah. So you can see that just doesn't end. It wasn't like fifth grade.
It never
was your
finishes.
turning
Yeah.
Point. It
yeah.
just keeps going.
Right. Yeah. Now in my work now with public university students, you know, we're always finding. I'm sensing that we're always trying to find our identity. Our identity is always challenged. Just because you become an adult doesn't mean that your identity stops being challenged. My identity is still challenged today as a father, as a husband, as an Adventist minister, as whatever, as a Mexican American. It's always being challenged. And so yeah, you know, we have now the opportunity to work with people who are being challenged in their identity in a public university setting. And obviously when you're in fourth grade, fifth grade, you go through these things, but you're not understanding what's going on. You don't have the mindset to think about what you're going through. You're just kind of going along with the wave. So
then later you had this high school experience in your church, and you had a fallout. About half the class had kind of left, and then
So what ended up happening was fourth grade or fifth grade, I started kind of getting involved with the wrong crowds. Started to look more into the gang culture and that kind of a thing. I had an older brother who recently passed away, but we grew up together, and so we experienced life. He's only 3 years older than me, so we experienced life together. I looked up to him a lot, and so I was really growing up, you know, 3 years ahead of my time just through him, because whatever he got involved with, I would get involved with, and so that just created a lot of challenges. And my mom, you know, looking at what was going on, just thought to herself, this is going to head in the wrong direction. By the time I was in seventh grade, I had been arrested, and you know, my brother had been arrested as well, and you know, my mom was just freaking out during that time, obviously, like any mother would. And so with that, all the parents got together and said, we need to help our kids. And so they went to the pastor and they said, whatever we need to do, we need to get it done. And so the parents really, and the pastor was a genius, I think. You know, Adventist education is so expensive, you know, and the pastor just figured out a way to make sure that we would experience Adventist education at a low cost. And so the parents got together, they put together the dollars that would be able to hire a teacher. And that's how Mr. Clark was paid. His salary Chester Clark. He was paid through the parents pooling together their dollars to pay for his salary. And so, without him, without his ministry, his mentorship, I'm convinced I wouldn't be a Seventh Adventist today. And so there's a lot that goes into that. You know, the sacrifice that he was willing to go through to not. I'm sure he wasn't getting paid $100,000 a year. So everything that he went through to really impact the students that he served. So
when he was your mentor at Vaca, he had a big influence on you. And so when he went back to Arkansas, you decided to follow him.
Yeah, I decided to follow him. I don't think I was one of his best students. I was a freshman, and my brother by that time was a senior, and a lot of the kids I think I might have been the youngest kid in the school, and I had a lot of issues, anger issues, and whatnot, and so always trying to prove myself, and that didn't make for a very good student, and Chester looked like a really young guy. I mean, I don't know what they drink in Arkansas, but the guy he looked like a student. When I first saw him, I was like, why is this guy wearing a suit to school? You know, I'm like, you know, and I thought, you know, white people, man, what are they doing? You know, the only white guy in the school, no, there was two white guys, and this guy's wearing a tie. And then I ended up finding out he was my teacher. So good thing I didn't say anything. But I forgot what I was saying. What was? I wasn't a good student, and so I was under the impression that he was leaving because of me. I'm like, man, you know, I mean, I had a bad mouth. I mean, it was a horrible. I'm sure it was a horrible. And then he's coming from Arkansas, so. Upon reflection, I'm like, I don't think he's ever encountered someone like me. So when he was going back to Arkansas, I was changing inwardly, but not outwardly. You know, this struggle, the Christian struggle was beginning in my heart. And I was like, I don't want to be who I am, but I can't help it, and so forth. And so I wanted him to stay because I felt that this guy was my connection to God. You know, I'm Hispanic, so I have this Catholic mentality, even though I was Adventist. I need this guy to connect me to God. And I don't know if he had a moment of weakness or he slipped or what, but he said, hey, why don't you come to Arkansas? And I was like, all right. So literally, he bought a Frito-Lay truck, you know, like those like food trucks.
Yeah.
He bought a Frito-Lay truck, no air conditioning, and my friend Anthony and I went in that Frito-Lay truck and drove all the way to Arkansas.
Wow.
Yeah, over the summer.
Did you tell your parents?
Oh,
Yeah, obviously we got our parents' permission. Yeah, and
no
yeah,
air conditioning in the summer.
no air conditioning in the summer. Drove from California to Arkansas. It was crazy. I mean, that thing was an oven, and we went to Arkansas. That was culture shock. UCLA had just beat you know, the University of Arkansas in the Final Four basketball tournament. And so we were super proud that we were going to this enemy territory representing LA, and we almost got killed. And so it was just very different. I mean, Arkansas is very different, and California was my only context. And so when I left Arkansas, we flew back. I filled out an application for the school, and they were full, and I had my final $25 or whatever it was for the application fee, and they told me, they said, look, just so you know, we're full, and so
You're on the waiting list.
yeah, and I put in my application, and they thankfully the response that I got was our school is full, but the principal, Mr. Clark, Chester's parents, they said we'll allow you to stay in our home as a community student. And so with that, you know, we packed up our stuff into our little station wagon, and my dad and my brother drove me to Arkansas.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm very thankful for the ministry of Mrs. Clark. I mean, it's, you know, she was like, or she's been like a mom to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's power in Adventist education. It's just, it's shaped, you know, who I am, and I'm very thankful for it.
So while you were at Watch the Hills, I mean, now you're in pastoral ministry, but
Yeah.
I mean, this wasn't something that you necessarily were thinking about before. How did that happen, and then
Yeah.
where's it taking you?
You know, it's interesting because as a young boy, I always wanted to be a pastor. Up to the 4th grade, actually, I wanted to be a pastor. I went to church in Huntington Park, and it was it's a beautiful. I haven't been back since I was a little boy, but the church was beautiful, and
I think it's changed.
yeah, okay.
Just the area, I know the area.
Yeah, and then, you know, you had what I loved about it, which is funny. What I love, our pastor was I think he's still pastoring here in California, Dr. Valenzuela, and he would preach not off the center but off to the side, and it was like this elevated. And I was like, man, when I grow up, I want to be able to do that. And there was nothing like spiritual about my desire to be a pastor. I just wanted to preach off that pulpit. And so I wanted to be a pastor. And then obviously when I lost my kind of like my Christian experience, I didn't want to be a pastor anymore. But the impact of Chester in my life, he was a pastor. And so his mentorship and that kind of a thing, I thought, man, I want to be able to do for others what has been done for me. And so that revived my interest in pastoral ministry. And so because of that, I wanted to study for the ministry. And so I went to Watch the Hills. And then the way I got connected with public campus ministry is that I took a year off, a gap year during college, to be a missionary on a secular university campus, which was the University of Michigan. And so I did that, and that revolutionized my experience, because now I didn't just want to be a minister, but I wanted to minister within the context of the public university. And so I met my wife at the University of Michigan. She wasn't my wife then, but she was studying education, and that's where we first kind of came in contact. And I saw I saw the students there at the University of Michigan, and you work so hard to get. It's one of the top universities, public universities. You work so hard to get the grades and to do get the careers. But I noticed that they were experiencing a revival in their personal lives, and I saw them put away their chemistry books and their biology books to study the Bible. And we'd study like all night long, 2, 3 in the morning. They're like, we just finished school. We want to study the Bible now with you. And that changed me tremendously. And so from that point on, I dedicated myself to public campus ministry. Now almost 20 years I've been doing it. So as a missionary, then I pastored in the Upper Peninsula at Michigan Tech University and Finlandia University. And then now I get to coordinate public campus ministry in our entire union.
I think it's important to note that your definition of a pastor and your desire to be a pastor changed after you were mentored by Chester Clark.
Yeah.
And that it wasn't only that you wanted to preach up there.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was that you wanted to get your hands into personal lives.
In the lives of young people.
And have God work through you in that way.
Yeah, it's pastoral ministry, it's not just about preaching, although the delivering of the word is the most critical part of ministry. And that's what changed my life. I mean, I remember in high school, and the funny thing is I just had a conversation with Chester this past week, a couple days ago. And I thanked him. I said, you taught me, you opened the Bible up, and you taught me the message of righteousness by faith, something that to me, I never imagined, never understood, I never knew existed. And one of the passages that we had to memorize was Romans chapter 8, verses 1 through 4, which to this day I remember. And in the Christian experience, just the idea that when we are in Christ Jesus, there is no condemnation. And what Jesus has done, to come and to rescue us, that God was willing to send his own son in the likeness of sinful flesh and for sin, condemning sin in the flesh so that the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us. That to me was just revolutionary, that God would love me so much that he would send his own son and, take the risk of messing everything up just for my sake, so that I can have the righteousness of Jesus, so that when God looks at me, he loves me just as much as he loves his only begotten son who never sinned. That to me was revolutionary. And it's when the Bible is opened up to the church member, to the young person, the impact that it has in the life is just incredible. And so, yeah, you're right. It's just the deliverance of the word is not just given. We don't just preach in the pulpit, but we preach through the way we live. We preach through the way we interact with people and through the transformation of life. And that's what made it click for me. Chester was very different from me. I mean, the guy was like, if you think about it, the least likely person to be able to win someone like me. I mean, he's white. I'm not. I mean, I was kind of racist at that time. I considered him nerdy, all these different things, and super holy, like we'd never be hanging out. And yet, his Christian example somehow impacted me, this guy from Arkansas, which he was, by the way, born in Loma Linda, so he's technically
Get the California blood.
Yeah, he's okay. He's got the California blood, yeah.
But I think he was relatable. I think that's...
Yeah, he was relatable. Every Christian should be relatable.
Right.
At the end of the day, wherever you're at in your Christian experience, if you're a Christian, you're like Christ, you're going to be relatable. Maybe weird, but relatable.
Can you briefly kind of elaborate on this point? You mentioned that your earlier Adventist teacher was more like a minister in the sense that she was a spiritual leader. Can you elaborate a little bit more that teachers aren't just there just to give you information? Yeah. But a true Christian teacher is there to lead you in the way of righteousness. Just a little bit going a little more into that.
Yeah. Mrs. Laughlin and Mrs. Arakawa too, Mrs. Nemhart as well. A lot of the things that they did just ingrained in my mind. They had long-term impact. in my life. You know, Mrs. Nimhart, for example, she was the first person that taught me about Martin Luther King, 2nd grade. And I remember that encounter, you know, of, you know, putting before me just this idea, this concept of being someone better than who I thought myself to be. You know, and she the way she presented the topic was, look, God has given us the opportunity to change the world and to minister to people. She was a minister in that sense, that she taught me be more than just a common person, but strive to be someone greater, higher than the highest human thought can reach. Mrs. Arakawa, I mean, it's everything that she did, you know, was profoundly impacted me. At White Memorial, we had this wall that you had to sit at during recess if you got in trouble. And I remember sitting there every single day doing my homework. To this day, I don't understand why I was always doing my homework but never had it finished. You know, I don't understand how that happened. I don't know what I was doing there, but her patience, you know, she was very patient. Her patience, her not giving up on me, that's a ministry of Christ. And Mrs. Laughlin, I mean, you know, Mrs. Laughlin, I remember, you know, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And Ephesians 6:1. I memorized that in 4th grade. And the long-term impact of that never, ever erased from my memory. Through all the ups and downs and through all the crazy stuff, you know, I'm in a gang and I'm like, children, obey your parents in the Lord. Yeah. You know, I'm like graffitiing, children, obey your parents in the and those things, they stuck with me. So they ministered to me in that, more than just giving me like, you know, 2 + 2 = 4, there was a long-term impact, spiritual impact, and eternal impact in what they did for me. And so in that sense, they were ministers, and they are ministers in their own right, in that they view education and redemption as the same work. They're one. And in investing in young people, they've invested for eternity. And that's what I hope to do. I work with an older demographic now, but I hope that the very, very same thing is that I will also be able to invest in the lives of other young people in the way that they invested in me. And as an educator, as a minister, with education being redemption, the same thing.
Well, we also want to give our viewers a chance to contact you should they want to get more involved or find out more about Public Campus Ministries. And also, in the event that Mrs. Arakawa may actually watch this.
Yes, please call me.
So we have a contact information on the screen as well for you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And that's our office there in Michigan.
Thank you. Thank you, Israel, so much for spending the time with us and sharing your story and reminding us that the ministry of Christ is not just at the pulpit, but it can be extended throughout our life. Thank you, viewers, again for joining us. Please continue to pray for us, support us through your donations, and also find us on the website. Have a wonderful day and join us next time.